Hello and welcome to our Small Business Survival Series. This is Nancy Smith, Executive Director with the Shawano Country Chamber of Commerce. And I am here today with Karen Kerber, who is CPA and shareholder with Kerber Rose. Good morning, Karen.
Good morning, Nancy. Nice to be with you today.
Thank you. And Karen's going to be talking about a couple of programs available to our small businesses: the Payroll Protection Program, otherwise known as the PPP, and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the EIDL. We have now received confirmation that there's a second round of funding for that, which opens up today. So Karen is going to show us a presentation on that and answer some questions, hopefully, that people have regarding that. And I am going to let Karen go ahead and take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Nancy. Well, good morning, all. I'm just going to have a short discussion here today about the Paycheck Protection Program, as Nancy indicated. Also touch briefly on the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and I snuck one in there on Nancy, and that's just a reminder about the retention credit as well. Hope to go through these relatively quickly, but certainly if you have questions, you can certainly feel free to reach out to our firm for answers to any of those as well. I'm going to start off, as Nancy indicated, there was some additional funding that was provided for the Paycheck Protection Program, better known or also known as the PPP. So an additional $310 billion was awarded for that program. Also, an additional $50 billion was added for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, with $10 billion of that being appropriated for the EIDL grants that you may have heard of as well. Briefly on the Paycheck Protection Program, this program is a great program that is available to small businesses as well as certain nonprofit organizations with fewer than 500 employees. It basically involves you calculating what your eligible loan amount is, which is computed at 2.5 times your monthly average for your payroll costs, with a maximum of $10 million. Now remember, the payroll cost includes your payroll as well as if you are providing health insurance to your employees, the employer portion of that, as well as retirement costs. Also included in that amount is your state unemployment that you may be paying into the Wisconsin unemployment. It does not include any of your federal payroll taxes that you are paying from the perspective of the employer portion of Social Security and Medicare. So it's a pretty simple calculation. And then you have basically the next 8 weeks from the date that you receive funding in order to utilize those funds to pay for either payroll or mortgage interest, rent, or utilities. And there are certain limitations as to how much of the funds may be used for that. Currently, only 25%, up to 25% of your total loan can be used for those non-payroll cost items. How you apply for this is to reach out to your local lender. We have a number of the local lending institutions that were doing a great job with the Paycheck Protection Program. They can provide you with an application and help you walk through that. Some of them have online portals that you apply through. Others are requesting that you email that to your contact at that local bank. So reach out to that individual lender and see how they would like you to proceed. Some of them have a little bit different requirements as far as the information they're asking you to submit. So also make sure you talk with them on that documentation that they require, just to try and get your application through in the first try and to get in line basically for obtaining these particular funds. It is a Paycheck Protection Program, and it is initially considered to be a loan, and the amount of the loan will be forgiven based on how many dollars that you utilize for the payroll versus that 25% of other costs. as well as on the number of employees that you were able to retain rather than laying them off. I'm just going to step back a minute with just to understand is, the goal is to really pull your employees back and begin to pay them rather than having them collect unemployment. And that may be that you partially open and you partially pay them. Your employee may receive a blend of both. Maybe you're going to be paying them some of their payroll, and yes, they'll still be eligible for some unemployment. That's a possibility. Just remember, it doesn't have to be completely an all or nothing, but the goal is to really pay the same number of employees during that 8-week period as what you would have had previously, and especially to get your full-time equivalents up to the same number as of June 30th of 2020 is basically what they were for that same time period a year ago. Another option is the economic injury disaster loan. This portion or this particular program allows small businesses and private nonprofits to request an advance on a loan. That advance can be up to $10,000. The original regulation indicated that it needed to be distributed within 3 days. We haven't seen any get distributed within 3 days. It's been more along the lines of 3 weeks, to be honest. Maybe once they continue to get their process and procedures ironed out, maybe that'll become shorter, but right now, patience is going to be considered a virtue in applying for this particular program. That advance is based on $1,000 per employee. So that grant could be up to $10,000, but if you have 3 employees, for example, your advance would be $3,000 because it is on a per employee basis. You are not required to repay any of that advance repayment. That portion does become a grant. So even if you decide not to apply for the full EIDL loan, or if for some reason you apply but it gets denied, you still will be eligible for this grant and you do not need to repay that portion of it. This particular program is administered directly through the Small Business Administration, or the SBA. So you simply go on to their website at sba.gov, and they have their different funding options there, and you will see this is one of them. You do fill out the form and the application completely online. If you are applying for a loan, you can see the terms there. It's basically a 30-year term, and the rate is 2.75 for nonprofits. It's 3.75 for for-profits. I forgot to include that. And the purpose of these is for payroll. And you can use both of these. There's been a lot of confusion about how the IDL and the PPP interact. The biggest recommendation is if you apply for an EIDL grant, use those funds for something other than payroll. So use those to pay some of your other expenses or to pay for some of your cost of goods sold or things of that nature, as opposed to using those funds for payroll. I'm going to briefly mention the employee retention credit. Have talked with a number of clients who just simply cannot afford to bring their employees back, even with the PPP program. There's no revenues coming in, and they're really trying to decide when it is they'll be able to open back up for business. And when they are able to open back up for business, what is that going to look like? If you happen to be retail or restaurant, will you be able to have the same number of customers in your store or in your establishment? Maybe yes, maybe no. We're not entirely sure what that's going to look like. So another good option for folks is, if they don't need that instant cash flow kind of like now, is to consider the employee retention credit. You do receive basically a 50% credit for each one of your employees, up to $5,000 per employee. So for some of our clients, we have taken a peek at this, and perhaps they would be able to get a PPP loan of $50,000, but on the flip side, they're able to get an employee retention credit of up to $80,000. With our businesses being closed in Wisconsin for part of the first quarter as well as the second quarter, you are automatically eligible to receive this 50% credit. And then say in the second quarter, your sales are down 50%, then you are automatically eligible for the third quarter as well. And then when we get to the fourth quarter, if your sales haven't come back to basically 80% of where they had been the prior year, you would continue to be eligible for the full year. It is a great option for a number of clients to utilize instead of the PPP. You do have to remember, in this case, it's one or the other. You cannot utilize both the Employee Retention Credit Program as well as the Paycheck Protection Program. I think I already covered those. The maximum credit is $5,000 per employee, and that is based on paying 50% of up to $10,000 of wages per employee. And remember, it's not truly just wages. It also does include any amounts that you may be paying for health insurance in this case. One thing to note, if you have fewer than 100 employees, all wages qualify for the credit, whether the employee is working or not working. So when you're ready to open back up, this can help provide some additional funding at that point in time that you would be able to take advantage of by reducing the tax deposits that you make to the federal government. If you have more than 100 employees, unfortunately, the funds can only be utilized, or the credit can only be gained by paying people when they are not actually working. That's the information I had today on the Paycheck Protection Program and the EIDL, and a little bit on the retention credit as well. With that, I can send it back to Nancy to wrap up for the day.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. So I do have a couple of questions. So what if a business applied for either the EIDL or PPP previously in the first round, but they have not heard anything yet? How do they check the status of that? And do you recommend they apply again?
Well, checking the status has been frustrating, I think, for the person who's applied, as well as the lender, based on conversations that I've had with various loan officers. We were assured that they would remain in line with their vendor, with their lender, that they were taking those applications on a first come, first served basis. Might not hurt to reach out to your lender and just verify that. But I would not think that you would need to reapply for the PPP, and the same is true for the EIDL, that there has been no indication that you need to reapply. The only caveat to that was I did have a couple of clients who were early in the game to the EIDL, and they applied before March 30th. If you happen to be one of those folks, please reapply because you may have gotten lost in the shuffle with some of the transitioning that was going on.
Okay. And then if a business went through a third party, like let's say Cabbage, should they check with them or check through their bank, that their lender?
My understanding is we had one local lender who was utilizing Cabbage quite a bit. I now understand that they are handling some of those loans themselves. So if it happens to be one of the local folks, I would suggest reaching back out to your local lender to see if they are still utilizing that Cabbage platform, or if they have now transitioned to submitting those loans on behalf of their customers directly. Otherwise, I believe you just need to rely upon the communications that you've been receiving from Cabbage and proceed according to how they're directing you to.
Okay. And we certainly want to thank all of our banks and lending institutions that have been working feverishly to get these applications in on behalf of our small businesses. I can't even imagine the amount of hours that they have, and frustration and stress that they're under right now. So we want to definitely thank them very much for that. Are there any other frequently asked questions or frustrations that you've heard from our businesses that you could address?
I think just initially it was some of the maybe delay in knowing exactly how to handle these. And I believe our lenders were doing the best they could, but there was some delay by the SBA on providing that guidance. So initially there was some questions surrounding that. The biggest questions we're receiving now is what to do with these funds. And we do recommend that if your financial institution allows you to, consider setting up a separate savings or checking account for these funds so you can make sure that you're tracking them appropriately. Also a great idea to track it with inside your software. So a lot of folks use QuickBooks. Set yourself up with a new liability account and put those funds there and relieve those as you actually utilize those, because it's going to be very important for you to be able to show how you actually spent those dollars, because that's going to directly play into how much of that loan is going to be forgiven.
Excellent advice. That's very good. And last time, the first round, the money went very quickly. So what is your advice for how fast businesses need to act on this if they have not yet applied?
I would suggest to everyone to apply as quickly as you can. As you indicated, that money went very quickly last time. Everything that I hear indicates the loans will be much smaller this time, which is great news, I think, from the perspective of, to me, that means it's starting to be utilized for the small businesses that really need the funds versus maybe some of those larger guys that got it, but certainly would encourage people to start that process as soon as they can. And the same is true for the EIDL. If you have not applied yet, please go there and apply. If you have employees, that additional grant is a great option for you as well.
And if someone has more questions, do you recommend the SBA website for them to go to?
The SBA website has great information. We also have good information on our website at kerberrose.com. We have a separate COVID-19 website that provides a lot of this information as well.
All right. Excellent information. Karen, do you have any other words of wisdom for our small businesses at this time?
Don't know if it's words of wisdom, but hang in there. I think as a community, we're all trying to do our best to support one another. So hopefully you can all hang in there and we can get back to what our new normal is going to look like in not too distant future.
Yes. Thank you so much. And we also have additional resources available on our website, shawanoecountry.com, on our COVID-19 Small Business Resource page. So, Karen, thank you so much for all your great advice.
Thank you. Enjoy
All
the day.
right. You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.